Yeah, San Francisco is the place where people shit on the road. That's yeah, yeah, yeah. Kind of similar to Waterfalls, it turns out.
I have something about San Francisco. I had never been there until like maybe 2 months ago, and I went. I was actually supposed to fly back to Toronto. My flight got canceled, and I was on a retreat with a guy. He's like, "I'm flying to San Francisco." We both met up at the airport. He's like, "Just get on my flight," because my flight was delayed for like 2 days. It was like when that plane crashed in Toronto or whatever. And so I went to San Francisco. I've never been in a place where I felt like the general population was more passive aggressive than in San Francisco. I don't know what it was, but it felt like everybody wasn't saying what they wanted to say. Like even like the
Well,
baristas.
do you want to know why that is? Jack, should I just start going off? I wish I
Yeah, go
took
for
a,
it.
yeah. I wish I was in the right mood for this. But the reason is because they're disintegrated. What I believe is that I think like what is real is life, and life is the physical interface of consciousness, and consciousness is information integration, which is like Tanini at Wisconsin. This is not my theory. This is him. Which is just to say that like what exists is like information that's integrated. Which is all to say that if we were all in person, it would be more real than if we're on this app, right? And like the reason why if you like go scroll for like on TikTok for like 5 hours straight, like you feel dead, is because like it's the peak of information disintegrated. And so like if San Francisco is like the peak, like is like the sort of like epitome of tech, right? Which we can say like the more tech, the more like you are just disintegrated. Like you're just like looking at a group of people that are disintegrated, which is like where they just start acting like not like themselves. What I'm trying to, and I'm not saying that's you. I'm sure you're very integrated. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you brought all those people and you put them in like a real environment with like like real trees, and they got off their phones and they were like walking around and there was like sort of like more real things, I don't think they would be passive aggressive. Not to say that San Francisco isn't sick. San Francisco, of course, is sick.
What do you think, Rashad? Do you agree that San Francisco people are passive aggressive? I just feel like it was like
I
a
think
blue.
the reason that people in SF are passive aggressive is like a little bit simpler than that. Like this feels like a strong, deep theory. I'm a little bit simpler. People take themselves too seriously. SF because there's this whole like, oh, I need to be building something great and blah blah blah, and that leads to people taking themselves way too seriously. And when you take yourself too seriously, you you do you end up acting passive aggressively because you're like instead of like just saying things to people or just being nice to people, you have this whole like hooty tootiness about you. so, and I think that I think it might be that simple. Like in New York, for example, people are not passive aggressive; they're just aggressive, right? Like, or in Philadelphia, like I used to live in Philly. There's no passive aggressiveness. There's just aggressiveness, and that's kind of nice. It's like kind of refreshing. Like, it's like get out of my way. I'm in a hurry. And that's kind of that's like the demeanor, and that's like totally fine because it's like, hey, I'm trying to make it, as opposed to like, hey, I'm taking myself too seriously, right? That's like roughly what I think the general disposition of people in SF is, and for better or for worse, I think SF is like one of the most homogenous places on the planet. Like it's actually kind of unbelievable. Like everybody works in tech. Like that's it. Like I can't remember the last time I like ran into like a group of artists or literally anything else. It's just like everywhere I go, everybody works in tech. It's just like the only heterogeneity is superficial, but it's otherwise like very homogenous city.
I think we're saying the same thing. Personally, I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay, I think you probably said it in a smarter way than me because I like couldn't follow what disintegration means. You know what I mean? I'm just like, dude, I'm just like, I like for me it's like much simpler. Yeah.
I think no matter where you live, there's hell. I think hell is just like a general property that exists, and so whether or not you're like in the middle of the jungle in Brazil, or you're in Peru, or you're in Toronto, or you're in San Francisco, like I think like you're going to be in hell, and so you just have to make sure you pick the right hell, which is also the same way of saying is that like every place is also sick, so it's just like choosing the right version for you.
Yeah, what you said reminded me a little bit of what Zach was saying earlier about if you get sued, you should be able to fight that person, to duel with them, you know? kind of reminds me of that a little bit. If you stripped everything back and we were just in a field, how would you settle this?
Wait, Zach, now you want to fight people?
No, I was just saying that like I was telling this story about a friend who like got ousted from his company, and then he sued the board, and it was the biggest mistake of his life because they essentially subpoenaed all of his personal like conversations, text messages, and it ended up ruining more than he ended up losing the lawsuit, and all of his personal relationships were kind of like annihilated. And I was just saying like if someone ever sued me, like my gut reaction and like the way that I react to it is like I should like at least be able to propose this as an option for like a duel. And like I just like don't generally like these like random like systems that are built up of like oh like this like court and then they can make you do this and make you do that, but like I don't like the idea that like I can't make anybody else do anything in those situations. And so like I simply think that an old-fashioned duel, especially amongst like two people of the same sex, should be an option.
Of course. That's sick.
Like if someone isn't willing, like if some and like this would be like still like rules, right? Like you couldn't bring a knife to a gunfight, but in a way, like if someone's like, I'm going to sue you and I'm going to make you like show up to court and do all of this kind of stuff, I should at least have like a thing being like, okay, like meet me in a mud pit and we wrestle naked. And if you say no to that, then you have to drop the suit. Because if you're not willing to at least just like do that, then this isn't that serious then. And you shouldn't be able to drag me like to do like your way. I just feel like it would get rid of a lot of like the bullshit and like I don't like performances and stuff like that. Like if I really cared about something, I would meet someone in like a pit of mud and wrestle them naked. But if it's not even if you're not even willing to do something like that, like then it's probably not that serious.
So you're saying if somebody brings a lawsuit against you, you should have the right to basically have some sort of like there's like a bar you have to hit in order.
Yeah,
to
like a buy-in. Yeah.
Buy-in.
If you're gonna make me have to go through this legal process, then you at least have to show up for this.
I think the insight there is like a lot of times like what is real is good, and so you're saying like like you could go through some like crazy fake, like very fake sort of like quasi arbitrary legal system, or you could just like fight the guy, which is just like much more real. And like a lot of times like things that are real are good. And I think like if like people could fight after a legal situation, they would probably have much better relationships with those people than just like a lawsuit. If that was more encouraged, you would just like get all the tension out. Could be wrong.
Yeah, I also just think generally it's like if someone was like, let's just say someone sued me for something that like I inherently don't think is wrong, and I truly believe that. Like I think I'm more willing to like show up to like fight for like what I think is like right than the person potentially using a system to get something that they want. And so like I just think that like the truth comes out when it comes down to like kind of like showing up versus like the difference is like I think systems and like processes are like exploited by people that are trying to get something.
But that's all of our careers, right? That's all of our careers. Like like I'm just saying, like we're just like playing on like these like kind of dumb systems that like allow us to like in some way, shape, or form like cause violence on some people because like we're winning on some level of abstraction they're not.
I actually really think that's interesting to dive into a little bit more, and that's not at all on the topics that we're looking at for today. But I actually think that's really interesting. Like I kind of want to dive in on that specifically, that idea of like, because I think there's a lot of like all of business exists in some capacity because there is some sort of flawed system that allows for an opportunity to exist, right? Like and system is like a very broad term in that context, but I think what's interesting is it's not is it always violence in that context, or is it also can it be the opposite of that? Can it be that you're actually mending something in a broken system?
When we're talking about things as large as like economic systems, like violence, opportunity, like any of these like words, like the answer, almost however you want to phrase it, is just going to be yes and no. I think like where all these things come down to is like what do you believe is good? And so I think everything is good is when you feel full of life, and I think everything that's bad is things that feel lifeless. And I think that is like a universal thing. Our model of violence is like very much in like physical, but sort of like as Zach talked about, like like damage gets done in the abstract, and so like like all these sort of like things that we did in past centuries, like like slavery or physical type of violence, like a lot of times like now they just like move up in abstraction, like just anything that is like reducing a 6-year-old's like ability to like be with himself and like not with an iPad, like I'm just like not necessarily for. Which isn't to say that you can't design economic systems to like avoid that and also like create a free market. Like absolutely you can. But again, these like words are just so big that the answer is like I think always going to be like yes and no. It's just like one thing Jack and I always talked about, and the thing I also say ad nauseum is like knowledge is an if-then statement, right? And so we can find an if that makes the then make sense, and like always, just again with the size of these words. We also don't need to talk about this stuff. We can talk about SaaS, guys, too. This is a SaaS podcast, right? This is a SaaS. I'm down to talk about whatever.
The chosen example, like happening to be one that, on the one hand, is visceral, but on the other hand, is not a lived experience, is just interesting.
Well, I think interesting just means like demands more thought that you're not going to have now. So we could just unpack it. I'm not even trying. That sounded way more aggressive than I wanted to. But no, like I could give a million examples. It's just that is like the most visceral one where we can all like the one thing I think people can get aligned with is they want to have their kids have a better future than they had.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, the reason I say it's interesting is again because it's like it's taking the idea and saying like, what is the impact going to be on if we view it in terms of like a generational like future casting thing. So that's like one reason why I think that the example is interesting. And then the other reason I think the example is interesting is I think like things like using the iPad is viewed more often than not from its like negative consequences, but generally like system. So like my view on systems in general is like that's also how we organize in order to cooperate to get things done, right? And so you take that same iPad example, and like it turns out like that has actually been that's been the single biggest driver of my daughter's vocabulary. And even more so than socializing with other kids, socializing with adults, like things like this. It's just like because the variance of ideas is so wide relative to like what one person would otherwise think about. It's like the system is also, again, like enabling the drive of cooperation of human beings because, again, like that's what vocabulary is. Vocabulary is like an ability for us to cooperate with each other because now we can express more interesting and intricate ideas. And so like yes, I agree that like systems on the one hand, it's like a removal from the sort of like one-to-one of you with your surroundings, but actually that removal is good because that's what drives organization. That's like what drove agriculture. That's like law drives, again, like organizational behavior at the country level, which then gets abused also. But those like the system. I mean, anyway, like if we want to stay in the territory of like, hey, what is a different framing of this same concept? Like, I'm kind of like a fan of systems, right? Like, not to say that we shouldn't ask ourselves like, hey, what are the negative consequences of these systems? But I think that actually that's like what drives cooperation.
I think the challenge though with the system, because I think this is a really interesting conversation. The like the iPad thing is a good example. My kids don't have an iPad, but my 4-year-old is learning to read using an app on the that my wife has on her phone, and we just like not every day, but most days sit down and do a reading lesson. And she's learned so much, and she loves doing it because it's engaging in a way that looking at a piece of paper is not. And then that translates to her reading things on paper, right? So there is like a good thing there. But the interesting thing about the systems piece, going back to that specifically, is that in theory you would think a system is just a structuring of like it. They are designed to create order, and that order allows for growth and development and all that. But I think that the challenge is when systems are built by people, the people that are building the systems have their own motivations. And oftentimes I think so much of our motivations, like things end up being something that I build for my benefit. If I'm building a system and I'm building it for my benefit, there is some group of people that almost certainly are going to be at a disadvantage in that system because it's being built for me and for my benefit. If I'm the one creating that system, it's almost impossible to create a system that's actually universally beneficial for all people. And so I think there's an interesting thing here where basically systems end up being negative for some and positive for others almost by default. It's almost impossible for a system to be fully a neutral thing that's good for all. And this goes back to like the legal thing too, right? It's the same thing, right? Like that's obviously that system is great for some people and bad for others. And that's just what ends up happening. And the bigger a system gets, the more convoluted it gets, the more like motivations get pushed into that system and the more warped it becomes, and less useful ultimately.
So SaaS operators, topic request from Sean. Did you guys see this on X?
Dude, this guy.
I think we got to honor it,
That's
guys.
too funny.
How do you choose the most confusing name for your startup? We need Rashab and Zach to chime in here.
Okay, so honestly, every time I tell people how I came to the name of Foreplay, like a light bulb goes on, and they're like, "Oh, like I get it now." And so I'll tell like the abbreviated version. But essentially, I was reading Richard Branson's book, Losing My Virginity, and in that book, he talks about naming your company a taboo name, and he kind of has like this section in the book where he like writes all the good things that happen naming it Virgin, and then all the bad things that happen naming it Virgin. And he says like, oh, like when I'm writing this book, you know, the word virgin doesn't seem that taboo, but when I named Virgin, it was very taboo. And I read all of the good things, and I was like, these all sound super great. And I wrote all of the bad things, and everything on the bad list, I was like, I don't really care that much about it. And so when I was starting, I had sold the e-commerce brand and I was starting something new. I knew I wanted to build software, and I knew I wanted to be in like ads and creative. And so I kind of gave myself the constraints of like needs to be taboo and needs to be one word. And so I was just brainstorming kind of this idea of like, what is advertising and marketing? And I was like, well, it's kind of just foreplay with a customer. And those were the dots that connected. And like, yeah, that's how I came up with the name. It was like, I wanted it to be taboo and I wanted it to be one word. And I found that advertising and marketing was foreplay with the customer.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it is. Fermat is not that interesting. It's like, I'm a physicist. I like physicists. And Fermat observed the first like physical phenomenon of what's called the principle of least action, which is light bends when it goes from like air to water. And that sort of non-obvious path is the shortest path. And so I was just like, I want something to do with the principle of least action for commerce. And so I just named it after him. And then I was also, in my opinion, I think other companies named after scientists do pretty well, like Tesla, Apple. Like these are like, they did okay. That was basically it.
I like that. I like that name. I hadn't thought about it. I only know about Fermat the scientist from Googling Fermat and not finding Fermat, but finding Fermat the scientist. So thanks for explaining that. I saw another tweet down here that I thought was pretty funny. Let's see. Fermat wins the tiebreak because the business is almost as confusing as the name. What'd you say, Rashad?
I saw that. I agree with that assessment. There's good and bad. There's good and bad about being a not well understood business. The bad is that it's hard to acquire customers. The good is that we really don't have any competitors. It's equally confusing to everyone. Yeah.
What's interesting though is your reason for the name is actually a really good summary for what it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's interesting to me. This idea of the least action concept. So.
Yeah.
Do you know like Carl Friston's free energy principle? It's kind of like working on that idea. I feel like you would like that.
I've never heard of it either. How does that link?
I would say it's probably the hottest new quote unquote theory of everything in like the bio world. And it basically just says that like all systems like strive to like do whatever will like reduce surprise.
Yeah. I that sounds reasonable to me. I think reducing surprise is what most people seek to do. So
he's a brilliant. He's a brilliant guy. But he also like his routine is And I think it's been like this for 40 years or 30 years. And I could be talking out of my ass. I just could be completely wrong, but I don't think I am. But he's like a British chap who wakes up, drinks his coffee, or drinks his tea, and he goes to his like garden, and then he writes some papers, and then maybe he goes to some. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that like every person's idea is a projection of him, of the person, and in that, I think in that case it's a little extreme with him.
Ah, I see what you're saying. Right. Interesting. Took me a couple seconds there. There's like a little buffer,
Oh,
Danilo, when you
sorry.
say something. No, it's me. It's me.
Oh.
It's a little buffer between when you say something and when I understand it. All right, like takes me like 2, 3 seconds. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it.
Dude, Jack, we got a rapid fire on Danilo because I don't know your story, man, to be honest. But Jack was like, yeah, he raised a bunch of money for a SaaS company, and then I don't know what happened after that. But now you're building houses near a waterfall. So something happened between raising a bunch of money for a SaaS company and raising houses and building houses next to a waterfall.
Yeah, I started a company called Mainstreet, which is now called Hoist. Raised a seed from Coleslaw and Series A from Greylock, and was part of Y Combinator. Yeah, worked on that company for a couple of years. And left it to do some research and also sign a legal contract, which leads me to the point where that is what I'll say on it. But it was a amazing experience for an amazing movie for another lifetime. But yeah, had an amazing time with some great co-founders, and was in a financial place to where I could kind of do like this, like take a, I guess, extended sabbatical. I wanted to do some research, and I was going to do it at a university, but it didn't work out. So basically, ended up doing the equivalent of like an independent PhD, which is a different word of saying I was just a crackpot. And travel around the world, and then like one of the things I did during that time was apply like the core of what my thesis was, to a place, and so that's what I built, which is this spot, um, uh, in Brazil. Um, it's an applied theory of the work I did. But yeah, I've also done like a bunch of like very random things. Like I figured out how to hack American Airlines to know like what celebrities were on what flights. So like had all these like 1099s like running around like LAX and JFK airport, like harassing celebrities for autographs, and like sold it on the internet. Just like I've done a bunch of like just random like fun stuff like that. And working on some cool projects that I can't talk about now, but just exciting stuff. Yeah.
We talked in like previously about like raising versus not raising and the different types of businesses that leads to. Like, what's your general sentiment on like what's your opinion on what's a good reason to raise, what's a not good reason to raise? Yeah, like what do you view as the differences in the business building when you raise versus not raise?
Well, it's like you look at Venezuela, right? And like Venezuela has like a lot of course I say something so random like that. Like Venezuela has like a lot of resources, right? Like they have this thing in the ground in which like they
Yeah.
take this thing out of the ground and it just prints money, and I started my first company with like $200, and I started my second company with like 25 million bucks. And the first company did more revenue than the second company. With these type of questions, like it's always an if then statement. And so for who the person is and like whatever their if is, like the then makes sense. I don't know if that feels like a cop out, but yeah. How about you guys?
We have like a span of different models. So like Fermat raised a lot of money. No is more like a
Incubator.
PE, yeah, incubator style, and then Zach, I think, just straight bootstrapped, right, Zach?
Yeah, yeah. I will say, like, whatever I do next, I think I'm going to raise for no other reason than like I generally look at life as as like a video game, which everyone says, but like and like I just look at it as like an interesting map to go do next, which would be like the venture route. My general uh, advice to people is like if you're starting your first software company, I think raising is a really bad idea. And then like for every other company after that, I think raising becomes more of a better idea for each company to do after that. And like in the same way that like if I started another company today, I would have more resources than I did when I started Foreplay. Like that is like a true statement that would just happen. And so in a way, like if I started another company right now, like I kind of would be starting it, you know, funded, but by myself at like a higher level. And so I'm like, well, why, if I'm going to do that route, then I might as well do it at the highest level, which would be like raising institutions. So like, I generally don't think that raising for like a first software company, if you like, especially when I'm thinking about like young people, is like a good idea. And I don't think it increases your like likelihood of success at all. If anything, I think it does the opposite.
It's all hell. It's all hell. Either way, it's hell. And that's okay. It's all hell.
The constraints thing is an interesting point though, because I wonder if on some level, this is more of a question than a statement, but if on some level it may be that you just have to be more disciplined if you have, I mean, it's not unlimited resources, but if you have $25 million compared to 200, that feels like unlimited resources, right? And so your discipline has to be greater, I would think, in order for those resources to be used as effectively. And maybe it's not even possible to use them as effectively. I don't know.
Like if what you did prior to starting a company was like you managed a massive department and you're really good at hiring, then you should probably go raise money, because your skill set is on hiring, and with capital, like the highest leverage thing you can do is hire. Versus like if you're fresh, the idea that like someone that is fresh would be very great at hiring and managing from day one is almost zero.
Well, I mean, I had a 1.8 GPA at the University of Delaware, and then, you know, raised the money and then hired the president of Groupon and the head of talent at Bridgewater, like pre-product market fit, and I don't think I was even like that good at it. I agree. I agree with you though. I also agree with you. Like, but I also disagree with you. Again, these topics are just so big. These topics are so big, and there's like sort of this meta idea that we can like apply, sort of like these like this ontological layer of a pattern to it. I think is quasi. I'm using quasi misguided, which is just a very fancy way of saying like it really just depends. Like
No, dude, you can't do this. What if people want to hear solutions? They don't want to hear like, hey, it depends. Like the guy who gets the most clicks on Twitter is the guy who's selling, hey, here's how to make free money, not the guy who's saying like it depends and you got to like think about. Like I don't want to hear it depends and you got to think about it. This is a podcast. We got to.
I know. You're right. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. Yeah. Raise all the money. Yeah, raise all the money. Raise all the money. Like, it's fun. It's fun.
You want to hear something crazy? I was like talking with an LP, and she gave money to this 18-year-old kid that was like essentially building. He was essentially building like Slack, but for high schools, and he took the money. It was I don't think it was like a couple $1,000,000. He took the money and he bought a Ferrari. And then they found out that the MVP that he had built wasn't actually an MVP. Like it was definitely like lipstick on a pig, smoke and mirrors. And he just like stopped working on it. And so then they went to him being like, hey, like we need our money back. Like this is like not legit. And he's like, I can give you all of the money back, but like I'm not going to give you back the money for the car. And then they're like, okay. And they just let him keep the car because they didn't want to sue him because it would be like a bad look. And I was just like, wow, like if I was 18, like maybe I would do that. So if you're 18, you should definitely raise money and commit fraud.
Oh my God, what is happening right now?
You only get to do it once, though. That's the deal.
You can only do it once. You can only do it once.
No, I heard they didn't want to sue him because he was a pretty big guy and they didn't want to get in the mud pit. That's what happened.
Okay, but we have two more legitimate topics we should probably get through.
Did you guys see this, by the way, the Black Mirror episode? There was like the first episode in the series. It made me so depressed. My girlfriend convinced me to watch it, and I thought, this is terrible. I don't like it. Let's switch to something more positive. But it's basically like your life on subscriptions, right? Did you guys see this?
I have not yet seen it, but I have heard about it.
Yeah,
I mean, is the thing here we're saying that like subscriptions are bad?
yeah. I mean, it was. I guess.
I think subscriptions are the best thing in the entire world. And I always go back to this when people talk about like software subscriptions being expensive and I get to pay every month for it, all this type of stuff. All I go back to is I remember when I was like 15 years old and I had just started like learning how to design and build websites. And like the cost of getting like the Adobe Creative Suite was like $2,000. And like that was an impossible amount of money to ever have. And so like I pirated it, and now you can get the entire Adobe Creative Suite for like $50 a month, and you can cancel it whenever. And people talk about like Adobe, oh, they make it a little bit hard to cancel, whatever. But like, I think subscription is the best thing in the entire world. Like, even like people like, oh, like Netflix is getting expensive. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like $20 a month, and you get more stuff than you could ever like use in your entire life. Like, if you're underutilizing a subscription, that's one thing. Whatever, then make a better life choice.
So, for what little it's worth, what people don't understand is subscription is literally just renting. Like that's all it is. And it turns out that renting is a very good model for managing cash flow as opposed to owning, which by definition, owning like creates exactly the rift that Zach talked about, which is it advantages the people that have more capital and more resources ahead of time. It's like super simple. Now, I think we're saying, hey, consumption may not be good or bad, but the model of subscription is it's a great financial model because it's actually more equalizing than the model of own only.
It's also better for the companies. Like consistent cash flow is better than non-consistent cash flow in most cases.
It allows for more investment and like sustained investment in a product. It is interesting though, because I do think a software subscription is very different than a physical goods subscription. Like if you're subscribing to, I'll just use a like a supplement company, let's say, that is different in that you are owning it, you're not renting it, and you're paying to own that on a consistent basis. And I do think that feels different than
Yeah, that's just like called subscription, but it's just a reorder.
it's a reorder. Yep, it's a different thing. And I do think that, like, to me, my value, I think that's why those subscriptions don't have the same sort of life cycle to them as a software subscription, because it is different in the way that it functions.
There's one subscription I think is bullshit. And I got an 8 sleep, and the fact that it's like a $4,000 mattress cover and I had to pay like whatever $200 a year for like the app, which like honestly isn't good. That's the only subscription I think is bullshit.
Wait, does the mattress functionality work without the app?
No,
Oh,
like there's no analog inputs. Like you can't be like set my mattress to this temperature. Like you need to use the app. But I've now referred like 5 people to buy it, and every referral you get a year free on the subscription. So I'm good for 5 years now.
So that's your strategy. You like the product well enough to refer it so you can get free app usage.
Great. Yeah, dude. Just stop sleeping after 5 years.
Yeah,
Problem solved.
that's the plan.
The TLDR on this episode is, I guess the title of the episode is Common People. This woman has some sort of traumatic health condition. She's going to pass away, or she gets onto the subscription, and then she starts doing ad reads. So the general idea being those people who are, who are the poorest, and I don't think they're the poorest, in the grand scheme of things, these are very wealthy people, have to put up with, I don't know, ad reads on their Spotify subscription.
It's something extremely spicy. If I got to live longer by doing a few ad reads, I'd do a few ad reads.
Right. I don't even think that that's like a question for anyone. Right? They would do it.
That seems like a really good trade. Like, unless it was 1-to-1. Like if I was doing a 30-second ad read and I only got 30 seconds of life, then that's like a horrible trade. But even if it was like 2-to-1, I'd probably spend a year just doing ad reads and I'd get like an extra 2 years. It seems like a good trade. Like life's the best. So
I think there's a lot of negativity bias in this. It's presenting it as well in like the least charitable interpretation. It's like, this is the hell and the grayscale life of having to, do a few ad reads. And I mean, it definitely does seem inconvenient. If you watch the episode, it's like, okay, there's a lot of inconvenience here. but there's just that focus on the inconvenience only, and not on the fact that she gets to live long. She gets to live.
People need to stop complaining. Like, even like these shows like Black Mirror that like paint this picture that we're living in like the worst like dystopian life is like the only reason, like the fact that you have time to consume a show about how you live in a bad world shows like how privileged your fucking life is. And like we live in like the best time now. And it was better than 5 years ago. Like the only thing that I wish we could go back to is like going out to a bar with like no like phones and things like that. Like I think the idea that like you could do stuff and it not be recorded, like I think would be like a level of like life and like risk taking that I don't know, I envy. But like everything else is gravy.
Yeah, the constant connection. I do wish that didn't exist.
But what is life other than going into the bar with your friends and not being worried about being recorded?
The idea that we're not getting any reciprocal trade-offs for that. Like I'm saying, that's like an acute example of like a negative thing. But like also, I don't know, like having my phone on me when I go out is also pretty fucking great. Like the idea that I can get an Uber and I can just be like, oh, it shows up.
DoorDash? You get DoorDash too? DoorDash is pretty incredible.
Oh, my favorite thing is you order the DoorDash in the Uber on the way home, and then you get there and you have what you want without standing in line.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes.
Or better, without foraging.
That is true.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right, guys. This was too good. I actually got to drop, but man, Danilo, it was awesome meeting you.
Pleasure, man. Come to the Waterfalls. Seriously.
You know what I heard? You know what I heard? I heard don't go chasing waterfalls. But you know,
There
you and I listen to different things, I guess.
Cheers, brother.